right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, it is part 2 of my week-long of FilmQuest Film Festival coverage. I recorded a whole bunch of episodes while I was up in Provo, Utah for the FilmQuest Film Festival, and today we are talking about the Beldham. And joining me, we've got guests Cavan Campbell, Joshua Matthews, and Kieran Shea, and we will also talk about their films, and we've got a great conversation coming up. A lot of great stuff to get into with this one, and actually tomorrow I'll be talking to the film's writer-director, Angela Gulner, who won Best Director for this film at FilmQuest, so congratulations to her, and look forward to that interview tomorrow. Before we get to today's conversation, I want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at PiecingPod, and don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. It's a fun community of film lovers. None of the regular internet monsters, just really fun people who love talking about movies. So come join us. It is called the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces group on Facebook. And with that said, I want to remind you on all of these FilmQuest episodes, if you're new to the show, we do get into spoilers. So spoiler alert for the Beldham. But with that said, let's get into the conversation about the Beldham. All right, we are going to talk about the Beldham, and joining me, we've got this great lineup of guests here, and I want to get to my guests first before we get into the movie. So everybody introduce yourself. Let's start out with you, Cavan.
I'm Cavan Campbell. I'm a writer and director based in Toronto. I'm here at FilmQuest with a film I wrote and directed, a short psychological thriller called Through the Throat.
Right on, right on. And Kieran, introduce yourself.
I'm Kieran Shea. I am primarily a screenwriter based out of LA. Getting into directing, I did a short with I co-directed a short with my co-writer who is coming later. This feature that we have is called Loose, and happy to be here. Thank you.
Right on, right on. And Joshua, introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Joshua Matthews. I am out of Austin, Texas, and I am here with 2 shorts. One I wrote and directed called It Draws Closer, and the other a short that I co-produced called To Hell With You.
Right on, right on. And we're going to get into all of your projects a little later as well. But first, we're going to talk the Beldham. Before we start getting into the whole puzzle pieces thing, I believe all 3 of you saw it last night for the first time at the screening.
Yes.
Were any of you familiar with the movie or with Angela, the director, going into this? Or was this just kind of like, hey, I'm going to FilmQuest. This sounds like an interesting one.
Well, my film opened for the Beldham last night, so I had an excellent juiced-in reason to be there.
Right.
I knew nothing about the film. I came in completely blank, and I'm actually really thankful for that because, it was great to have the film surprises just kind of like roll out directly into my brain in real time.
Yeah, it is a very mysterious movie, and it like keeps its secrets kind of close to the vest and everything. So absolutely. Either you guys, were you familiar with it at all?
No, I opened for the film as well, and I read the log line just to kind of get a taste of it, and also because my wife was with me and she doesn't like horror, so I wanted to be able to tell her like, you can come to this one, you can stay. But I went into it fairly blind, and so happy I did.
All right.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat, although I'm sorry to say I had nothing opening for...
You were just there.
I was just there as kind of an assignment because I was going to be here. I knew I had to. I was probably going to watch it regardless, but I didn't know initially if I was going to be able to see it prior because I wasn't sure about my flight.
Sure.
But then fortunately it all worked out and I could watch it. And like these guys said, it was great to just watch it without prior knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's going to be an interesting one to get into with our whole format of influences and everything. It is going to be a heavy one, I think. I mean, this is a very heavy subject matter, this movie, but, we'll have a good time anyway. But I think I want to start it out with a first puzzle piece here, which sometimes I do have to go to something that's a little too new to really truly be an influence, but I think it still fits in a way as almost like a companion piece. And have either of you seen Cuckoo this year?
Oh, yeah.
It's so good. It's a great little horror movie starring Hunter Schafer, and it also features, the Beldham is defined in the beginning of the movie as like a bird-like crone, I believe they say, like an old woman who's like after a child. And that is like literally, this is almost like a Deep Impact Armageddon kind of situation here, where you get these 2 movies with very similar kind of antagonists and very similar like close to the vest secrets that are kind of slowly rolled out, and the filmmaker really keeps it very, very secretive throughout, and really interesting movies that kind of take very different turns as they go. But the initial setup of these like bird creatures kind of in the air right now, almost a little bit. So you saw Cuckoo?
I did, yeah. I have to say, great description. I can't abide your Dan Stevens erasure, though.
Yeah.
Because Stevens is phenomenal in that movie.
Yeah.
Cuckoo was a lot of fun.
Glitch.
Yeah. That's going to haunt my nightmares now. Yeah, Cuckoo was great. I think that, I think like, gesturally in terms of what the how the films operate, kind of a perfect fit as a puzzle piece. Yeah.
Right on. Have either of you seen that?
I haven't.
I have not, but I'll have to watch it now.
Okay, well, I just wanted to kick it off with that one. Cavan, let's go to your first one.
Okay, so my first puzzle piece, I hope it's not too obvious a one, but it's Jennifer Kent's The Babadook.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I feel, like a pretty congruent through line between these two films in terms of discussing like concepts of like the mother as monster, but beyond that, which I think is something that a lot of horror films, especially like in the last 10 years, have touched on, there's a lot of really sort of instinctual like fear of failing one's child, fear of not being able to protect your child. Mm-hmm. Also, this is probably not a super incisive comment, but the style of Harriet's journals that are found partway through the Beldham is obviously that very simple black and white kind of line drawing effect, which is at least slightly reminiscent of the art design style of the Babadook like children's book in the film. And I mean, the last thing that really spoke to me about that is that like in the Babadook, there's so much shot construction that's really like these claustrophobic, very tight shots that just feel like a little too tight to be natural. And like 70% or so of the Beldham being shot interior, again, is very reminiscent to what Kent was trying to do of taking like very regular sort of lived in pedestrian spaces and making them seem horrible by just like twisting them a little bit in terms of how the lens is used to realize the space.
No, absolutely. I think it's funny doing this podcast for like 6 years now. The Babadook is one of the most influential movies of the last 10, 15 years, it feels like. And it's such a strange little movie, you know what I mean? But it really is rubbed off in a lot of horror and horror adjacent storytelling.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a masterstroke for Kent, and then obviously she followed it up with The Nightingale, which is a different kind of horror film that I would argue is much more depressing, but for reasons that are far too real.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, birds.
Oh God, yeah, right.
Let's go to your first one, Kieran.
Well, my first one is The Others.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite movies personally, and obviously there's the whole mother with the children. Obviously, Nicole Kidman has 2 kids in her film, but there's this idea where she is essentially not acknowledging or refuses to acknowledge what actually happened to her children, that she, killed them and then killed herself. So she's created in a supernatural way this reality where she has to protect the children to the nth level. And there's a similarity there with the Beldham where, she's overprotective of the baby. She's always with the baby. And it's not until the very end where she sort of comes to terms with what actually happened to her child. And it took a number of years, as the reveal is. But I felt there was a lot of sort of similarity in story there.
Yeah.
I also liked the fact that it was essentially contained to one house.
It is it's
one single location. Various sets within the location, but still it's in one house. In the Beldham, it was a smaller house, but still one location.
Yeah.
And everything pretty much happens there, and it's where the event took place.
Yeah.
So I felt that was good, and the sound design.
Yeah.
Was the other thing, and I felt that with most of my picks, the sound was something that you can see through all of them, because it was the sounds in this film were very important. Like when you hear something, there's a reason for it. And with the others in particular, it's a big empty house. Mm-hmm. So whenever you hear like like one little thing, it has some meaning to it. It's
intentional.
Yeah. And I felt that it was used in a similar way.
I made note of that too. I hadn't thought of the others. A good one to include here, but I had thought about that with the sound design. I mean, a lot of times, not to pick on any independent features, we're all looking for budget and everything, but a lot of times sound is a place where things are lacking when you're watching films at festivals. And Angela Gulner's team, who I didn't write down a sound editor or mixer or whatever, but obviously did a great job of doing great work on the sound and making it all intentional and making it all like really kind of help sell what's going on in this woman's head, basically. So it's all super important. But absolutely great one. Let's go to Joshua's first one.
Well, see, I joked earlier before we started that I was just going to steal y'all's ideas and run with them. But my second puzzle piece was going to be the Babadook. I'll move it ahead so we don't have to come back to it. I mean, basically for everything that you said, but to me, it's the drama and the grief of just motherhood and of wanting to, of the challenges of being a mother and the effects that it takes on you. I think Angela did a really good job of turning that trope on its head with that twist of it just staying with you forever. And I can't even describe the effect that had on me when that twist was revealed. But I loved that she took that kind of theme of grief and trauma and motherhood and made it something that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
But the Babadook had the opposite kind of effect of me, where it made me kind of hated the kid at times. And this one I just felt so bad for the kids, and then I felt so bad for the mothers, and then I felt so bad for the grandmother. Spoiler alert!
I joked in my Letterboxd review, you're gonna feel bad when you finish this
feel
movie.
Bad, but in the best way possible. It was just a movie I've never seen that happened before, and that kind of in a horror film, right? It comes out and it's a horror film for a completely different reason, similar to the Babadook.
Yeah.
But I won't drone on about that because you said it so well. But yes, Babadook.
Right on. Yeah, absolutely. And to the themes of motherhood, I mean, obviously we're a bunch of guys here on this panel. I mean, it's tough scheduling during a festival, trying to mix all the guests around to the different movies. But
you can wear a wig.
What I'm hearing is I was not your first choice.
You guys are wonderful. You guys are all just beautiful and wonderful. I will go to a movie called The Dark and the Wicked for my next piece. It's a little smaller film, but it's also a movie set in a house with, a horror movie, obviously, where, there is this trauma at the center of it and mental illness at the center and the inevitability of that all of this is going to come kind of crumbling down. And The Dark and the Wicked is one of the scariest movies I've seen of the last few years. And I always recommend it when people ask for a recommendation of a movie that actually scared me. And that's a movie, it's not just scary, here comes the jump scares and here comes the dread and all that kind of stuff. But also just the idea this could literally happen to anybody. Anybody's mental health could be affected in the ways that are, being seen in that movie and the things that are happening here with the Beldham. Any of you seen The Dark and the Wicked?
Yes.
No, I haven't even heard of it.
It's really good.
Very scary film. Director of The Strangers, yes?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Completely different film than that.
Yeah.
Kind of unreal how different it was. I loved everything about that film until I think the last 5 seconds.
I've heard that from a lot of people.
Don't tell me why. I still want to watch this.
I won't. I rewound it. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But that whole movie was full of dread and terror and just, again, something that I hadn't really seen done, or at least done that well.
Yeah.
Yes, highly recommend it. Won't spoil it for y'all, but definitely check it out.
Yeah, that's another movie where you're going to be like, when it ends.
Yeah, it's just not don't watch it before you go to bed.
Yeah.
Or if you want to have a good day.
Yeah.
So it's a real feel-bad kind of movie is what I'm hearing.
If you're already kind of down in the dumps and you just want to be worse, if you just want to feel bad about yourself, put that movie on.
Yeah.
You're describing my whole life right now.
Okay, then,
so
stick it on after the podcast.
There we go. Let's go to your next one, Kevin.
Okay, so my next puzzle piece is Ari Aster's Hereditary.
Okay.
but probably not for the reason that you guys might be thinking. So when I'm not working on my own projects, I work in lighting design for film and TV. So inevitably, I end up thinking a lot about color, and particularly about the use of color in lighting. And the thing about the Beldham is it makes a really interesting choice. It does not get seen a lot, I think, in a lot of horror films, that a lot of its like night interiors have this very sort of bit inky, yellowish incandescent color cast to the scenes that are usually motivated by sconces or lamps that are in the scene. It goes in the face of what stereotypically you think being the scary look of the indoors, which is usually a much cooler, more desaturated sort of color palette. Anyway, that is quite similar to what Ari Aster and his cinematographer in Hereditary achieve. All of the like night interiors in that film, with the exception of Toni Collette's workshop,
Right.
I think rather pointedly, everything else has this, again, very decayed kind of yellow, kind of inky, incandescent lighting look that I think is really off-putting overall, because it superficially, when you come into the space, it feels warm, it feels slightly more inviting, it feels like, oh, this light and this color might be motivated by like, a fireplace or something, and this feels very, rustic and lovely. But then, as horrible things start to pile up within the space, I think this color scheme becomes very sinister. And I thought that was really effective within the look that they were setting up for the Beldham, and it really kind of screamed out to me like, where have I seen this? But oh, right,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right on. Yeah. Another movie where the location just matters so much, and like nailing everything about that, because it's just mirroring this character and just everything that she's going through. So and Hereditary, another just incredibly influential movie of the last few years. So another good one to bring up. Let's go to your next one, Kieran.
My next one is The Orphanage,
Okay.
which is also one of my favorite movies.
Scary movie.
It's a very scary movie. It also is fairly confined to a location within the grounds of the orphanage, but it's another film where, kind of like the others, the mother, in this case, inadvertently was responsible for her son's death.
Sure.
When her son goes missing, she moves some scaffolding or something around, and it kind of blocks the exit for the kid. Mm-hmm. So when she finds him, eventually she realizes, she did it.
Yeah.
And then, she overdoses on pills, and she ends up becoming the caretaker of all these other kids that had passed away at the location, becoming sort of the motherly figure in the afterlife. And of course, that doesn't happen in the Beldham. It actually has, a much more sort of, if you'll say happy, but like a happier ending, in that she comes to terms with what happened. Sure. Whereas in these other films, and Orphanage in particular, I don't feel... Well, she pays a very steep price. When she finally comes to terms with it, she dies, basically. Sure. So, but there is again that overlap there, and sound again I thought was incredible. And weirdly enough, like you were mentioning, how the cinematography worked in certain scenes, and I think you brought it up also, where a lot of it, even though you're in a fairly large location with the orphanage, certain moments feel very claustrophobic. And I felt that way with Beldham also, where, she's having issues with what she's seeing and what she's feeling, and you kind of go in on her very tight. And there was a similar thing done in the orphanage. And I thought the way they handled the horror aspects of it were, there was also a little bit of, because you don't know often whether what you're seeing is accurate or not, and that was the case in the Beldham, definitely.
Yeah, no,
more
absolutely.
so.
You've got that like kind of tragedy / horror kind of transition. Also to the point of like the end and are coming to terms with everything that's gone on. I like that it kind of continues into the credits. Just so you're kind of, you know that like just because it's not like a movie where it just ends and like everything's okay. Like you know that there's more time that's happening.
Well, I like that you mentioned the fact that it goes sort of over the credits and you see the interchange between the present and when she was a young woman and at the site and she's very alone whenever you go to the younger version of her, she's always sitting there by herself on the site, and when she's in the present, she's always with people and she's helped by her community, by her family, by her whoever is there, friends, and so even what I felt from that is that, as you said, despite the fact that she's come to terms with it, she keeps going back to that past where she was very sad about it. So it's a lingering thing.
Yeah,
and I like how that happened. I like the abrupt cuts between the bench was in the same spot and the people just kind of switched out. And it was. It
was a cool moment to add on there at the end there. Joshua, let's go to another one.
Well, my second puzzle piece was actually the orphanage.
Oh, really?
No. I was wondering if
just probably a little on the nose, but Rosemary's Baby. For all the reasons you think, and maybe some you don't. But to me, what really struck about Rosemary's Baby and this is the dread of being at home and not being safe, of the motherhood of not being able to take care of your baby. You feel like some outside force is going to come in and harm your child. But mainly the not believing women aspect of that film. Nobody believes Rosemary. Nobody believes. I just blinked on the lead.
Harper.
Yes, Harper. Nobody believes Harper throughout the duration of the film. What I like about this though is they turn that trope upside down and you're not supposed to believe Harper. Like she is wrong. She is having these false memories. She is losing herself. And I love that you could play with the expectations of what Rosemary's Baby and films beyond that have set up, and then turn that in a way that's so beautiful and heartbreaking. I thought was a genius stroke. But also just like the neighbors of Rosemary, and they just feel like an impeding force, this imposing force coming after her and the child, and it almost feels like the family is up to something because they are. I mean, they want to keep her safe, but it feels to her and to us like they want her baby as well. Like they're keeping her baby from her, locked up in a basement or attic. Like it's very eerie. But that film was the one that stuck out the most to me.
That whole era of movies is conspiracy based, so it's like it absolutely fits here with what's going on with this lead character, and that's a good one. And I was also thinking about the idea of like nobody is really going to help you. No one's going to help you. Rosemary's Baby, no one's going to help her. So it's like she's kind of got to deal with this, you know. So good one. I'll go for one more, and I'm going to go with The Sixth Sense. M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense. Not just because we have a big twist at the end, but because if our lead character could at any point just stop and think about her situation and what's going on, she might actually realize what that twist is towards the end and like come to realize what the situation is that she's been in the whole time. And let's not spoil The Sixth Sense, but if Bruce Willis ever stopped and noticed that nobody's talking to him and all this stuff, like he would see like, oh, I'm a ghost this whole time, and so Harper's, her whole situation there, she would maybe see the clues that are kind of on the wall. And I only got to see this movie one time so far, the Beldham, but I would imagine there's probably some clues throughout that maybe are kind of telegraphing some of that, and that would kind of clue you in at the same time as it's cluing her in.
That's a great choice.
Yeah.
Like I'd love to go back and watch this film and find those clues.
Yeah.
Because they have to be spread out throughout.
I would think so.
But that's a beautiful film to compare it to.
It's such a good movie. But one more from you, Kevin.
Okay, so my third, it's also kind of related to cinematography. So some of the choices that they make, especially in like the front nine of the Beldham, involve shots that are framed to be in frames. We are seeing characters through apertures, through doorways, through windows that are partially covered over. Also in that great sequence that happens later in the film, where you're seeing characters both from below and above through that heat register that's in the floor. Yeah. And I found like that was rather reminiscent to some of the look of Roman Polanski's like apartment movies from the late 60s, early 70s. So we're even, because you beat me to Rosemary's Baby. But the other one that I think I was thinking about a lot when I was watching it is The Tenant. Because he plays a lot, again, I've already touched on this, the idea of claustrophobia and stuff, but using these like off-centered compositions where you're like looking at people that are not fully framed within doorways, where things are cut off, and it's just this great effect of making you want to like lean around in your seat, so you can actually like look around whatever obstructions the camera is purposely putting in front of the character you're most supposed to identify with. And you touched on the idea of like, you know, a lot of those sort of paranoia apartment films from that era, from late 60s, early 70s. And I think a lot of them had really interesting visual ways of trying to like create this sense of like distortion and disconnection within rooms that, if you were to look at them, seem like, oh, it's just an open room, there's nothing scary about this. Right. But if you can find a way through some kind of framing device to cut off part of the room, or to veil an unexpected part of it, you turn something that's normal and expected into something that is a big question mark, where theoretically anything could happen. I think stylistically they employed this quite a bit on the Beldham in a way that I found really compelling and that I liked quite a lot. And it really made me think quite a bunch of, about some of Polanski's films from like 40, 50 years ago.
I wonder if there's anything to like older people are constantly like looking at their photos, photo albums and picture frames, like anything like that to that point of the framing and the frames. So I don't know, it could be one of those clues we're talking about, but let's go to one more, Kieran.
Well, as it so happens, you mentioned my third one, which was The Sixth Sense, and essentially for mainly the same reasons. But one thing I just noticed that you mentioned is that, if Bruce Willis had sort of really paid attention to what was going on around him, he may have figured it out sooner.
Right.
At least in the three that I picked, there was a similarity where the lead character is essentially, I feel like they're purposely avoiding reality. Like they've created their own world in a sense, and they are, purposely just ignoring everything else. Because I think that had any of these characters, whether it was Nicole Kidman and the others, or I forget the actress's name who played the lead in The Orphanage, as a Spanish actress. Anyway, if she had sort of paid closer attention to what was going on with what she was doing to look for the child and Bruce Willis, essentially. And also in the Beldham, if Harper is sort of truthful with herself and sort of acknowledging things, but they all refuse to acknowledge what's kind of staring them in the face, and us as an audience too. And we, in a sense, ignore everything too, because they're ignoring it.
And they're our protagonists, and we want to kind of
exactly. And with something like The Sixth Sense, if you go and rewatch it, you can see all of the clues. And the Beldham had some of those too, and it's like, so we purposely ignored those clues as well, in a sense. And when films can get you to do that, it's a pretty interesting thing. Absolutely. And of course, that big twist with. Turns out she's the mother. Or grandmother.
It's a great twist. I mean, it's tough to make a good twist nowadays. Everyone's looking for them constantly, and it definitely it surprised me. I was not expecting it. So, totally. Let's go to one more over there, Josh.
I wanted to say Creepshow, but only because of the roaches in the walls and the crows in the wall. But this movie is too deep for a joke. But this is kind of a cheat because I did talk to the director after the film. But Ghost Story is one that I think is
such a good movie.
A big kind of influence, mainly in theme and in shot composition. In theme, it's just being stuck in a memory, just not being able to move on from for a ghost story is a place and a particular time in his life. For this is can't move on from her experiences as a young mother. But I found that really beautiful of she just can't move on. She's stuck in this constant loop, and that's what a ghost story is like. It's a constant loop of life, basically. Like they just keep going over and over and over again. But I thought that also the cinematography, to your point of a ghost story is basically shot like a photograph, like every frame, even the border around the 4:3 composition makes it look like a Polaroid that you'd stick in a photo album.
Right.
Same with the composition here with the tight 1:5:5 aspect ratio. Everything's kind of framed up to feel nostalgic and to feel like you're experiencing her memories and her kind of longing for that past, which I thought was a great choice, that composition. And then going from that composition to wide, when they were in present day, was a very great choice. I heard somebody next to me go, "Did the aspect ratio shift?" like they thought maybe it was a mistake, but it was like perfectly timed that it just felt natural. Yeah, I thought that was a great choice. But yeah, I think a ghost story was, and even in the color and the look of it, like it feels like you're watching something old, like you're watching like a memory. I thought that was a great look.
No, I think that's a really good one. I hadn't thought about that at all, but I think that's like an interesting thing to wrap this up, because like going over things like obviously the Babadook, but like things like The Others and Hereditary and The Orphanage, and I mean just so many different ways to deal with horror that also deals with these kind of mental issues, and like it's just an interesting kind of trajectory of all of these movies that kind of all fill a slightly different version of that kind of a story. So any closing thoughts on the Beldham before we get into you guys' films? Let's just go around.
The one thing that I also found, it's not cinematography related for once, was really interesting about some of the narrative choices that they made, especially at the end with the big reveal in the Beldham, that I quite liked, is that it has a much more complex take on how to structure emotional and intergenerational trauma into horror. It's become a bit of a running joke that a lot of modern horror films, like every single one, is fundamentally about trauma and about dealing with trauma. Yeah. But I think the most interesting films ultimately don't make the concept of dealing with trauma their theme. They make a much more specialized little offshoot about like specifically what kind of trauma or specifically how to deal with it or what the results are, as opposed to a general concept of trauma. And I thought what they did with the Beldham was really interesting, because there's more of a resolution to that trauma than we normally ever see in a horror film that's touching on that sort of thematic avenue.
Yeah, that's true.
And I found that A, just really refreshing, but B, just also really compelling, because in a sense it makes the twist kind of even harder to predict, because it's doing a twist, it's turning what is shown you on its ear, but it's also ending in a way that you're not going to expect, even if you kind of expected maybe where you thought it was going to go.
Sure.
I thought that was really refreshing and a lot of fun to see.
I'm with you, absolutely. Kieran, let's go to...
Yeah, for me, I think it's the relatability factor. Because as you pointed out, we're a bunch of guys here talking about a very strong female-driven story. But everything that's being presented is very human. It's something that everybody can relate to, like the what you were mentioning, the repetition of cycles and things like that's I've been stuck in moments in the past before. I probably still am trying to get out of it. It happens to everyone. Dealing with like somebody in your family who might be at a sort of dealing with the mental issues when you get to a certain age. I'm dealing with a member of my family with that right now. It's sort of early on, but it's very difficult. Yeah. And it's something that is very relatable, I think, regardless of who you are, man, woman, whatever, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the fact that it can touch you regardless of who you are.
Yeah, and not to skip over you, Joshua, we'll go to you next, but I did want to just say off of that, the thing that I was thinking about, like, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I'm 44, and in my head, I'm like 23 or something.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? My body's 44 or older, but, you know, so it's like the idea of, you know, kind of not really knowing who you are, like, it seems very possible, you know, and, you know, especially as you get older in age, and if you've been through some, you know, awful things like a character in a movie like this or many other people. But Joshua, let's go to you though.
Kind of the same. We have a close family friend who is going through dementia right now.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the films that can tackle that subject matter in an authentic way without making it a trope, a silly trope, because it's such a hard illness to put on the screen. And I thought that she did a fantastic job of portraying this illness. It's a hard one to watch because of it.
Sure.
But I think that it was approached in such a delicate way that I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard one to do. I've seen people do it, and it's goofy. It's too tropey. It's insensitive. Very few films can do this, and I really appreciated that. I guess that my fourth puzzle piece would be this episode on Hulu's Castle Rock, where Sissy Spacek's character has dementia, and there's an episode that just follows her character. And this is the only other film that felt like it was portrayed in such a realistic way. Like, this is what it feels like to be dealing with this, both as somebody who's I can only assume it's dealing with it, but also family members who are dealing with it. Yeah, I just thought she approached that tremendously.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up the Beldham. I want to talk about you guys' films for a little bit here before we wrap up. Let's start with you, Cavan. Tell people about your project.
So as I mentioned, I'm here with a short psychological horror film called Through the Throat. It is a film that follows unhappily middle-aged Janine as she's dealing with an internal demon in the fallout of a breakup that starts to become frighteningly real and palpable in her life. It's best way of describing it is it's a film we did not make during the pandemic, but is absolutely my pandemic film. It very much touches on a lot of ideas about, sort of the universality of the experience of, depression and isolation that, I mean, basically all of us in one way or another were going through for those, 2.5 years that we were dealing with. And that I saw in, all my loved ones and my friends as well, where it's like you're seeing isolation and depression being almost more infectious and more virulent than the actual disease that all of us are trying to keep from getting.
Sure.
I hope that doesn't sound too flippant about how serious COVID is and was. But the thing was, I thankfully was very lucky. Nobody I knew got seriously sick with COVID during that time, but everybody I knew was dealing with situational depression and was dealing with isolation, and some of us were dealing with it very badly.
Yeah.
So I was trying to reckon with that in this film, which tackles, a breakup and vampires.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's an interesting movie because it definitely goes through a series of ideas like along the way. I mean, it starts out with this kind of, like you were saying, depression. I thought like a self-hatred almost, and into being about a breakup and dealing with that, into then there's vampires and there's a voice in her head, and there's a lot of different things. I also thought at one point it was going to be about a voice box, like from the title Through the Throat. That's what I thought was going to be heading towards, and it was, but it went in supernatural direction. But yeah, I mean, maybe talk a little about the mixture of ideas that kind of went into this.
Well, beyond the whole, cauldron of, what we were dealing with during COVID, when I started really thinking about what I wanted to touch on and, how to even make a film, because we shot this in 2022, mm-hmm. And there was a real debate, particularly between like myself and my editing partner and my lead actress, about like, how do you even make a film about the pandemic now? Because you can, like in 2022, you could not make, I would argue, a film literally about the pandemic because it is so close and so raw. So you need to find a way to create that sort of emotional and narrative distance. And so I started thinking about all these things, and I realized the story I was really interested in telling was about the way that we create monsters when we turn all of those sort of, virulent, infectious things like depression, like isolation, like, disappointment in one's life, or self-hatred, as you alluded to, and the monsters that we create when we turn those inward.
Turn them in on yourself.
And when I realized that this was going to be a very internal kind of film that was going to have a limited number of locations and only, in essence, one actress on screen, who inevitably kind of ends up playing two characters by the back nine, but I realized that it gave a lot of room to cycle through, I think, a bunch of sort of related, sort of emotional terrors that, not to harp on it, but that we were all dealing with during the pandemic, but also I think things that we just all have to deal with as we get older,
No, absolutely. So obviously the pandemic is an influence, but any movies that were, major influences for you with those?
Oh, that's a good question. 2 years since I had to think about that terribly much.
Right.
Probably.
Pieces.
Yeah. I should have thought about my own puzzle pieces. I'm so unprepared. I don't really think there were any direct links or anything that I was directly pointing to, like, I want to reference this. I think there was fundamentally a lot of sort of emotional references that I was trying to capture, primarily from two filmmakers that I've already mentioned, which is Ari Aster and Jennifer Kent, who I find to be two of the most interesting contemporary horror filmmakers working right now, who are, I think, in all cases, of all of their films, trying to find these interesting ways of, like, using the visual and narrative idiom of horror to talk about real life and to talk about things that all of us are kind of dealing with. And I think the main sort of influence that came from those films, and I rewatched Hereditary and the Babadook and Midsommar in the lead up to putting together my shot list for the film, but was to try and think about, like, okay, I don't want to necessarily make a film that's going to look like any of these films or is going to be edited in that way, but how are these filmmakers, how are these storytellers talking about reality through the lens of horror? And then what can that say about the way I'm trying to do it in, a different environment and obviously with a different palette of characters?
The person that I thought of actually was Darren Aronofsky. I was thinking of that kind of trilogy of The Wrestler, Black Swan, and The Whale, of these people who are just kind of inwardly destroying themselves.
Oh, interesting.
So that's what I kind of came away with.
I love it. I'm a big fan of Aronofsky. I was completely not thinking of any of his films when I put it together, though.
I get it.
But I don't know. It's always kind of fun when you find the, subconscious sort of influences that were maybe sitting there, and that's why I love seeing it with an audience, because people see influences that you yourself as the filmmaker didn't have.
Absolutely.
And that you're not even in charge of defining. There is no reason to say that yours is any less the right answer than mine because you detected Aronofsky.
There you go.
It obviously means there's something of it there, so it's fun. I like it.
Right on. Well, Kieran, yours is a screenplay, so it didn't screen here, and it's not, created, but
It's
tell us
screened in my mind.
Yes, tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I'll tell you about that, and then a couple other things that are at this point sort of more on the forefront for my writing partner and I. My writing partner, first of all, is David Osorio. He was unable to come at this point. He's coming tonight, so you'll get to meet him later. But we wrote this script called Loose, which is essentially, it's a story of the devil, and in this version, Luce is the devil. She's not evil, but she feels that she does a very worthy job at being able to separate the worthy of going to heaven and, those that have to go to hell, and everybody hates her for it. So she is upset about that, so she would like to break her contract. And she goes to God, who in this version is not very nice. He's a bit of a douche. And he tells her that he's going to break the contract as long as she wins a bet. And the bet is that she has to get a very evil person to do something good. And she has 7 days to do it in, and she has to be completely human in that time period. So when you follow her journey, she sort of goes through this range of emotional things that she herself has never felt. In that time period, she actually falls in love, which she's never done before. She's never felt that before. She runs into women that this evil person is essentially abusing and using for his own sort of nefarious purposes. And she ends up being driven to help those women. And then she ends up getting the guy to do the good deed, but rather than having to try to get him to do it from his own heart, she ends up using her devilish kind of her tricks to essentially force him into it. And so in order to win the bet, she essentially has to become the devil in a sense. So that's kind of the story, and it's one that's very dear to my heart. I had that idea when I was in film school. It was supposed to be my thesis film as a short, but the scale was a bit too large for the time, so we ended up doing something else. But the story always stuck. So we wrote it, and as I mentioned to you guys earlier, I'm very proud of the fact that it was a finalist in the California Women's Film Festival. Because, as not a woman writer, the fact that the women at that festival recognized that it was, a strong female story was very special. And so that's one that we would love to have made, but it would have to be, it's a much larger thing that we're able to do. So what we're working on right now is our script that took the third place last year at FilmQuest as a feature, called Borderline. And Borderline is about, essentially it sprung from a news article that my writing partner, who's Colombian, and believe it or not, I know I look super white, I'm half Hispanic, I'm half Paraguayan. I lived in Paraguay for a number of years in South America. I speak fluent Spanish. I actually speak better Spanish than Dave, who will punch me later. He found this article about, and I'm sure you guys have read similar articles, about a truck that was found somewhere in Texas, and it was abandoned somewhere in the desert. And when they opened it, there were about 40 people inside. About half of them were dead. The other half were in very bad shape. Children, there was one in particular where it was a father and his 8 or 10-year-old kid had passed away. And what they surmise happened is that the coyote that was bringing them across got spooked by something, thinking that the Border Patrol was going to catch him, and he just stopped and left them there, and he took off. And he didn't bother to open the back of the truck. So the truck was there for God knows how long. Heat in the day, cold at night, and it was a mixture of getting burned to death. So that story always stuck with him, and he mentioned it to me, and we started talking about it, and we're like, well, maybe there's something we can do with it. We didn't want to do the exact story because we felt that would be a little too, in a sense, a little wrong, but we did want to show the problem.
Sure.
And horror and the supernatural stories tend to be good vehicles to tell a story that has a bit of a message without feeling like it's a message too much. So, and both of us being Hispanic and wanting to give opportunities to a primarily Hispanic cast, we wrote the story as a short and then as a feature, and we shot the short. But the feature essentially follows a Border Patrol agent whose fiance and little girl that he met, they had crossed illegally at one point and he caught them. But in trying to help them, he ended up falling in love with her. But because she crossed illegally, she had to go back to Mexico. So she's living on the Mexican side of Nogales, and he lives on the American side of Nogales. And he's been trying to, help with her paperwork and stuff, but it takes a while. So meanwhile, she and the little girl get kidnapped by one of these guys that bring people in for, sex trade, that kind of thing. And essentially the same story plays out where they're in they get to the truck and then they get abandoned and then they die. And then horrible deaths start happening. And one death leads to another. And essentially what you find out is that her spirit is getting revenge on the people that she felt were responsible for what happened, and it's leading to where the truck is with the people there. So it's a bit of a grisly kind of story, but we're taking advantage of Santa Muerte, which is part of the culture on the borderline. We have most of our locations. We'll shoot in Arizona, in Tucson and Nogales, and a little bit on the Mexican side. And we're sort of at the point where we're trying to get some funding and some other folks involved, casting and things like that. So it's very near to our hearts, and we'd like to make it. And then of course I'm shooting a short. We're planning a short that was a quarterfinalist this year. I will say the name, and then you'll know why I can't say too much about it, because we're working on casting. It's a very long title, a little bit pretentious, but I love it, for a short film, and it's called The Elevator Pitch, or How I Got Stuck in an Elevator with the Incomparable Doug Jones. Based on something that actually happened to me and Doug Jones about 10 or so years ago. And that's all I can say about that.
No.
So that's long-winded. I apologize.
No, hey, no, it's all good. Yeah, and I mean, who can't get excited for a supernatural revenge movie with a message to it? So it sounds great. And I wondered if Doug Jones would come up at some point during all of these FilmQuest recordings. But there you go. Right on. So Joshua, tell people about your film that you got playing here.
Yes, we actually have two here. It Draws Closer, which screened last night on a Halloween night, which is great for. I just am so happy that we get to screen on Halloween night. That I wrote and directed, and then I have one that I co-produced called To Hell With You that screens tomorrow, directed by Jason Sheedy, who comes in tonight. So hopefully y'all can meet. And To Hell With You is about it's the angel and demon whispering in your ear, a botched exorcism, demon and angel fighting over the soul of this kid. It's very funny, set in the 70s. It's got a very groovy kind of vibe to it. I'm not going to do his inspirations because he'll have to tell you that.
Sure.
But I did want to mention it. It is a really funny movie. If you get a chance to go watch it, please do. It Draws Closer, the one I wrote and directed. The inspiration for it was nothing as intense as any of y'all. It was just, I got scared that something was under my bed. And as a 41-year-old man, that's like, oh, something's there.
That never goes away.
It doesn't go away. So I just, wrote the script out real fast, and I was like, this would be a fun one to do. But I hadn't made a narrative film in like 12 years. Mm-hmm. When I graduated from film school, I did a big Western film that just kind of, it took all my money and all my all the wind out of my sails. It was a beautiful film. I loved it, but I found myself falling into documentary films, and I did that for about 10 years, docs and marketing videos. And all my buddies like Jason Sheedy and all of his team were making these great little short films. They were so fun, and I was getting jealous. I was living in Texas, they were in Atlanta, and I'm like, I just can't make this divide yet. I'm broke. So recently I became not as broke. So I'm like, let's do another film. And this is the one I decided to do because it was short, and I had never really made it. Horror is my favorite genre ever. I mean, I'm sure that's most of people at this festival right now, that's their favorite genre. But I've never made one. Yeah. So I really wanted to get it into that space. And I just felt like this would be a good avenue. It was short. It was a 2-page script, which was challenging for me because I write long and I shoot long. So basically whatever my script page count is double that in runtime.
Yeah. So
I wanted it to just be short. So I wrote a 2-page script. It was a 4-minute short, keeping true to doubling my page count. But yeah, it was a fun ride. We've shot another. Me and Jason co-directed another short last month that we're working on now. We got a couple more coming up next year. We're just going to keep this train rolling and keep making some fun horror stuff for y'all.
Right on. Yeah, it's funny you saying that, like, you're mainly just into the idea of just still being scared of what's under the bed.
Yeah.
Like, I was kind of thinking it was about, like, being scared of what you might create. Like, as this woman is drawing this creature, and then the creature actually shows up. Like, that's what I was kind of, like, getting out of the film, and I thought it was a really cool, like meta kind of horror thing there.
No, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. There's something about like being an artist and creating something and like showing that in the film of somebody else being created. Like I love Stephen King, right? And I love that Stephen King writes about writers writing horror.
Yeah.
This is just very meta, and so I do like that kind of
In the Mouth of
trope.
Madness.
In the Mouth of Madness, such a good one.
Yeah.
But mainly I did the sketching because the guy who plays the creature, his name's Brett Brooks. He also plays the demon in To Hell With You. He's a great actor, but he's a great, phenomenal illustrator. So he did all those sketches. I was just trying to think of what I could use without having to pay anybody.
Yeah.
So I was like, Brett, I got a film. He's like, cool, what is it? I'm like, well, it's this cool little horror short. You have a smart bit, but I need you to really draw. He's like, cool, I'll do it. And he read it and he's like, I'm in this for 5 seconds, dude.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, but your drawings will be there.
Your drawings will be there and you'll look cool.
So luckily he agreed to do it, and they're great. But yeah, that's the main reason it was sketching, is because I haven't seen it in a short. I saw it in the feature. But but I haven't seen it in a short, and I had access to it.
Yeah.
So that's why I did it.
Makes sense. Makes absolute sense. I was just going to say one like kind of again, like this is like one of those things where it's like puzzle piece, but like more of a recent movie. It's more like a companion piece. But did you see Stop Motion this year?
I haven't. It's on my list.
It's really good, about a stop motion animator whose creations are coming together.
Right.
You know, so that kind of reminded me of a real good companion piece with what happens in this short. So you know,
yeah. Most of my puzzle pieces were other short films, because I wanted to make a short, so I studied shorts. I just wanted to see what was working.
Yeah.
So I took a very analytical approach to producing this film. It's like, what are festivals? What are they like? What's the average runtime for them? Like what's hitting?
Yeah.
It was like Lights Out, and there's a movie called Salt that was Jeb Shepard, Rob, the guy who did Host and.
Rob Savage.
Rob Savage.
Yeah.
Which is the best short I've ever seen in my life. Like it's like 3 minutes. And
it's called Salt. You said?
Salt. SALT. Because it starts at the very last moment you can start a film, and it finishes up real quick, and it's a complete story in like three minutes. It's so good. And I took those as like inspiration for like writing this and making it as tight as possible. How far can I go into the story, and how quick can I get out of it? So those are mainly my my puzzle pieces.
Right on. Well, everybody, tell our listeners where they can find you and your work and everything you're up to.
So my production company is called Interlock Pictures. That's INTERLOCK. So you can go check out my website, which is www.interlockpictures.com. A couple of my previous films are up there to watch for free, actually including my previous film, Receiver, which played at FilmQuest in 2021 and won Best Sound.
Nice.
I couldn't be here for it because it was the pandemic and Canadians were not allowed to cross the border at that point. Oh God, I'm just really harping on the pandemic today. But Receiver's there, as well as another couple of things to take a look at. I'm on socials. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Interlock Pictures. And because I'm sure we're all film nerds sitting right here, I'm on Letterboxd at SecamTO, which is SECAMTO.
Right on. How about you, Kieran?
Well, I'm a little embarrassed to say that we're a bit behind on the curve in terms of links and things.
Sure.
We're slightly older than you guys, like by a year or two. So we're actually currently working on some links that we would have to promote what we're working on. But I can be found at Facebook. It's just Kieran Shea, KIERANSHEA, last name. Other than that, you can mail us directly at Kieran@wordasylum.com, all one word, or David@wordasylum.com, all one word. So.
Great.
And hopefully soon you'll have an actual link and we can join everybody in the modern world.
Yeah, stay off of it. Trust me, it's terrible. It's not worth it. Joshua, how about you?
Our production company is called Heebie-Jeebies Pictures. You can find our films at heebiejeebiespictures.com, Instagram Heebie-Jeebies Pictures. My personal Instagram is Josh D. Matt, D as in David, MATT. But most of our stuff's going to be on EBs going forward. We just launched yesterday. We're pretty happy about what we've produced recently and the things that we're going forward. But you'll be able to find all of Jason Sheedy's and the team's previous films on the site as well.
Great. Well, guys, thank you so much for doing the show, and hopefully we'll get you all back again sometime.
Hope so.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about the Beldham. Thank you so much to my guests, Cavan Campbell, Joshua Matthews, and Kieran Shea. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, tomorrow I will have Angela Gulner as a special director interview coming up, and then we'll get into some more FilmQuest films. But if you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you are subscribed. Wherever it is you're listening right now, just hit the subscribe or follow, or I don't know, it might be a little like a plus sign or whatever it is in that particular app. Hit it. That way you'll find out about all the episodes we've got on the way. We've got a total of 7 FilmQuest episodes. Then we're doing a live show on Heretic here in Las Vegas this coming Friday. That'll be up on the feed the following Monday. And then I've got a whole bunch of other episodes that are already recorded, ready to go. And then who knows what else we're going to end up covering. So make sure you are subscribed. You could also follow us on social media at PiecingPod. I told you about the Facebook group already. We also have a Patreon produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, from Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. So you could check that out if you want to support the show. And with that said, let's close this out with a piece of music like I always do. And let's see, what am I going to play today? I'm going to go with a track from my album, An Unseen Sky. This is a song called Shadows on the Ceiling, and I'm trying to remember, did this play at FilmQuest? I was at FilmQuest years ago for a bunch of my music videos, and oh God, I probably should have looked that up before I picked the song. Anyway, a bunch of my music videos played at FilmQuest years ago. This might have been one of them. I don't know. But you can find all my music videos at youtube.com/music by David Rosen, or just check out my website, bydavidrosen.com. Hope you enjoy this song, and we will be back with more Piecing It Together tomorrow.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.